Today we shall discuss Paper 6, Module 1, Unit 4. Recent Advances in Public Administration, Ecology and Feminism. The objectives of this unit are to understand the basic premises of the ecological approach, the contributions made by John Gauss and Fred W. Riggs to the development of the ecological perspective. We shall look into the feminist critique of traditional public administration and the lines of developing a feminist perspective of public administration. First of all, we shall take up the ecological approach. What is ecology? Ecology really is a concept that is drawn from biology. It pertains to the interrelationship of living organisms and their environment. We can say that it is the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms in the interactions amongst organisms and the interactions between organisms and their abiotic environment. The distribution and abundance of organisms on Earth is shaped by both biotic, that is living organism related, and abiotic, non-living or physical factors. Now, when we come to public administration and talk about the ecological approach, we are really talking about public administration being affected by its surrounding environment, by the society, being affected by economics, the political milieu, the social milieu, the cultural conditions, and on the whole, the overall environment of a country. That is, we talk about public administration getting inputs from its environment, being conditioned by its environment, and in turn conditioning it. The importance of the ecological approach in public administration. What is the importance? What does the ecological approach really try to do? For one, we can say that the ecological approach tries to explain public administrative behavior. That is how public administration operates. It also tries to predict public administrative behavior, that is suggesting how it is likely to function. That is with reference to the environment. Looking at the environment, it tries to explain public administration's functioning and it tries to predict the functioning of public administration. In the process, the ecological approach also tries to identify weaknesses within public administrative systems. What are the weaknesses? We look at the environment. We look at the surrounding of public administration and we try to understand under what conditions the administrative system is functioning and what are the shortcomings of that system that are generated as a result of the environmental factors. The ecological approach also, I would say as a corollary, helps to correct defects in the administrative system. That is, once we can explain the system, once we can identify the weaknesses of the system, and once we can predict the system, we can also find out ways and means of correcting defects in the system that are largely dependent on environmental or ecological factors. Now, here Important contributions to the ecological approach have been made by John Gauss. In fact, we can say that the ecological approach in public administration was first elaborated by him, John Merriman Gauss. He wrote a book titled Reflections of Public Administration, which was published in 1947. In the first 5 chapters of this book, we find these were actually lectures which he had delivered in the Southern Regional Training Program in Public Administration at the University of Alabama during the week of November 26 to December 1 of 1945. Now, what was Gauss trying to show? He showed how crisis and changes in people, place, physical technology, social technology, and philosophy in the first half of the 20th century led citizens to repeatedly look to the government for relief. Politicians, in turn, created or expanded the powers of public agencies. That is, as the people were facing problems, as newer circumstances or conditions were coming up in the first half of the 20th century, they were looking to the government for the solutions. And the politicians were making use of this situation, and they were creating newer agencies or expanding the powers of the existing agencies. Now, regarding the process of public administration, Gauss actually used 7 factors for explaining the process. These factors were the people, the place, physical technology, wishes and ideas, catastrophe, and personality. These were factors which clearly impacted on public administration, according to Gauss. Now, in the field of ecological thinking in public administration, we are all familiar with the name of Fred W. Riggs. He lived between 1917 to 2008, and he was one of the foremost exponents of the ecological approach. Riggs developed different models. Initially, he developed the model of the agraria, transitia, and industria. And then later he moved on to develop the fused, prismatic, diffracted societies model, or what is known as the prismatic model. Here we find the ideas of Riggs. If you look at the ideas of Riggs, he was emphasizing the need to understand the environment in which a system operates. He was drawing heavily on the structural functional approach that had gained prominence in political science. The emphasis was on the open system perspective, showing the interactions of the administrative system with the wider social system. His approach, considered appropriate for studying society at different levels, and in fact, he looked at 3 societal types: the highly developed Western industrial societies, the traditional agrarian societies, and the developing societies, which he termed the prismatic societies. This basically was his approach, trying to understand the system as it was set in the framework, in the wider social framework, and how it was operating in that context and responding to it. So we have looked at the views of Gauss and Riggs, contributing significantly to the ecological approach in the field of public administration. This approach, however, has certain weaknesses. What are the weaknesses of this ecological approach? One weakness that can be identified is that it ignores the evaluation of policies and the realization of intended goals. The focus is elsewhere, really. So actually making evaluation of the policies, making an assessment of the policies, critiques have pointed out, has not been very effective. And in the realization of the goals, the ecological approach falls short. Also, public administrative models built on the foundation of the ecological approach are usually intuitive, and they tend to rest on a priori assumptions. There is, as the allegation goes by the critiques, made by the critiques, that there is a lack of empirical basis. In the ecological approach, empirical studies are somewhat sidelined, as the critics feel. Further, it has been pointed out that the approach is highly complex, and as such, it is difficult to apply. So from the ecological approach, which we have seen, it has its advantages and promises, as we have noticed. It has its weaknesses also, as critics have pointed out. Let us move on to another dimension, that is feminism and public administration. We are all familiar with feminism and feminist ideas, which seek to focus on the marginalization of women in society, in the political space, in the economic space, and which seeks to critique it, interrogate it, and suggest ways and means for bringing about gender equality and removing the marginality of women. Now, feminism, of course, does not have a single stream, but there are many dimensions, many strands of feminist thought. And in fact, there are scholars who would rather refer to feminisms rather than feminism as a single strand of thinking. Here, we shall not look at different aspects of feminism, but we shall try to see how feminist ideas try to interrogate the field of public administration. Now, this is significant because in different areas, feminist ideas have been making an entry point or trying to make an entry point, and public administration is one of those areas. If we look at traditional public administrative thinking, we find that it is not gender neutral. Theoretically, it may appear to be gender neutral, but in reality, it is not gender neutral. Rather, it is largely an area that can be referred to as a male bastion, dominated by men, controlled by men. There is no defining body of feminist theory in the field of public administration. And little attention has been given to developing a feminist theoretical framework of public administration. This is the reality till date, that in public administration, there is no concerted theoretical framework along feminist lines that has been clearly developed or elaborately developed. But then, since the last couple of decades of the 20th century, feminist scholars have started knocking at the doors of public administration. They have started questioning traditional public administration, raising questions about the gender bias that is there in public administration. Now, the reasons behind the absence of feminist ideas in public administration. Why aren't feminist ideas given importance in the field of public administration, which I have already mentioned is basically a male bastion? Several reasons have been identified. One reason probably is that male theorists and practitioners in the field of public administration, and those operating in the field of public administration are almost all male, they are simply unaware that a feminist perspective does exist at all. They are just not aware of it, that there is a feminist perspective. That can be one reason that can be identified. Another reason that can be identified is that even if they are aware of the existence of a feminist perspective, they decide not to discuss it. They do not discuss it because there are certain negative connotations associated with feminism. Talking of feminism, many people consider it to be very radical, an extremist point of view. Many people consider it to be irrational. Others look at it as emotional. Feminism is essentially emotional, not scientifically accurate, does not encourage rational scientific thinking. So, feminism is not given encouragement in the field of public administration. Still, another reason is that the qualities that are associated with public administration, considered desirable in the field of public administration, are qualities that are essentially masculine. Leadership is commonly associated with qualities such as toughness, assertiveness, and aggressiveness, particularly when it comes to times of crisis. That is, in other words, the notion is that an administrator, a person working in the field of public administration, should be someone who is tough, should be someone who is assertive, and should be aggressive. And more so when some or other crisis comes about. And these, in turn, are considered to be essentially masculine virtues. Virtues that are not associated or linked with women. So, because of these reasons, we find that feminist ideas in public administration have not been encouraged over the years.